I didn't just want to do well, I needed to. Because deep down, my worth was on the line. Every room I walked into, I sized myself up. Every success, still not enough. Every failure, just more proof I didn't measure up. And I didn't realize it then, but in trying to prove myself, I was slowly losing myself. And maybe you felt that too. 7th grade, new school, first year playing football. I was standing with some teammates after practice, just trying to fit in, when a kid leaned over and said 4 words I've never forgotten. "You don't belong here." I froze, I was embarrassed, hurt, and I laughed it off like it didn't bother me, but I believed him. And somewhere along the way, I made a quiet vow. I'm gonna prove that I do belong. And so I went to work, in the classroom, on the field, and even in my church youth group, just thinking if I could be impressive enough, I would show people that I do belong. But it never worked. Junior high turned into high school and then college. And if you looked at me from the outside, you would think I was doing great, but inwardly, I was still chasing that voice because the belief had taken root, this idea of you're not enough unless you prove it. And so I lived that way. The 4.0 grade point average, pushing for soccer records. I was leading, I was performing, I was grinding, I was trying to earn my place. I was trying to stay ahead of the doubt. And I carried that mindset into adulthood, into my coaching and my teaching, my pastoring, parenting, trying to be everything to everyone. That wasn't until last year. It finally caught up with me. I was coaching high school soccer. At the same time, I was leading a youth ministry. I was raising my family, and all the while, I was battling some heavy symptoms from a recent relapse I had with my multiple sclerosis. I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually, but I just kept pushing, still performing, trying to prove that I could handle it. And I hit a wall. And I was dry, and I was spent, and I was just running on fumes. And I felt like I was just failing at everything. And I didn't just want to rest, I wanted completely out. Out of the pressure, out of the performance, out of the cycle that said that you're only as good as what you achieve next. And that's when I came across a passage in Galatians that just stopped me cold. In the passage, Paul says, "Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God?" If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Paul named what I'd been too afraid to admit. You cannot chase approval and follow Jesus at the same time. Because approval, it always demands more. It never says you're enough, but Jesus does. Jesus doesn't measure your worth by your hustle. He doesn't define you by your performance. He doesn't name you by your wins or your wounds. What he says is simply, I have called you by name, you are mine. Not because you've earned it, but because you're mine. This series, it's called Becoming the Real You. And I think the first step is laying down the labels. Labels like not enough, and failure, and performer, and disappointment, even the good ones like impressive. Whatever name you've been chasing or trying to outrun, you can lay it down. Because you don't have to prove yourself anymore. You're already chosen. You're already loved. You're already called by name. If you've been carrying the weight of needing to be more, maybe it's time to lay that down. Not because you've given up, but because Jesus has already called you enough. I spent years trying to earn my worth. But here's what I know now. You don't find your value by winning. You find it in who you belong to. And so I'm done performing for a place at the table. Jesus, he's already pulled out the chair. And if you're tired too, maybe it's time to stop trying to prove yourself and start living like you're already chosen.